Okay. So this week, we're turning from Abraham and his characteristic of wonder or, being alert to injustice, to Sarah, his wife. And I think that Sarah is a really interesting character. Like many women in Tanakh, she's not given like a lot of airtime. Um, and but I think she really brings something to the table, right? And often when she is given her airtime, it is often portrayed in a negative light, like when she asks Abraham to send Hagar away. And so I want to look at her from a different perspective. So let me share my screen here, and also what went out in the email last night. So if we look at Breishit Yud Chet Yud Bet 18:12, we see I hope I let that person in. We see Sarah, where she is listening in, or maybe like eavesdropping on God's conversation with Abraham, where Abraham is being told that he'll have a child with Sarah, right? And it says, "Vatitzchak Sarah bekirba lemor," and Sarah laughed to herself, is how it's translated normally in English, saying, "Achrei bloti hayta li adena va'adoni zaken." Now that I am withered, right, I'm older, am I to have this enjoyment, adena, with my husband so old? So on the face of it, perhaps she is questioning whether this is really possible even for her to have a child anymore, right? Something she had wanted for so long. Finally, she's being told she might have it. And so the Ramban teaches, what does it mean to laugh like inside of yourself? And so he explains lala'ag, that it's with derision. Kamo yoshev v'shamayim yitzchak Hashem yil'og imo. So the Rambam learns that it's with derision. It's like a mocking laughter, and he learns it from this pasuk in Tehillim. The sitter in heavens will laugh, and God will mock them. Ki hasachok l'simchahu bapeh. Right? He says the Ramban is teaching that the laughter where you feel true joy comes from your mouth. As imales chok pinu, that also comes from a pasuk in Tehillim, that our mouths will be filled with laughter. But he feels like when the laughter is in the heart, interestingly, or inside of you, that's not a reference to joy. So it's almost like a snort, or like a, like, oh, that's not going to happen. She's laughing, right? Almost, I think that she's laughing at God, right? This is a very harsh read of Sarah. That being told that she's laughing bekirba means she's laughing in a sort of inappropriate way, either mocking God or mocking the news, laughing sort of out of anger. But there's a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, and I don't have the original here, so I'm adapting from Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz, who's the dean and co-founder of Yeshivat Maharat, wrote a blog about laughter, and she quotes him here. And she says that there's a Hasidic teaching based on the ideas of the Baal Shem Tov that God created the world with simcha, ahava, and tzchok. Through joy, love, and laughter, right? So here we already see that laughter, this internal laughter, is being turned from something that's derisive or mocking into something that God does also. To create something from nothing, the primary ingredient is simcha. The Baal Shem Tov goes on to explain that when a king laughs, his kavod, dignity, and kingship is diminished. And it is in this state that anyone can approach the king. Normally, you have to go through the secretary or the guards before you can petition the king. But when he is in a cheerful state, when his dignity is diminished, even the lowly servants can approach and greet him. So too, when God created the world, God's joy caused God to become diminished. God withdrew from the world, engaged in tzimtzum, in contraction, and with that tzimtzum created a void. It was within that void that the world was created. In that space where God's laughter appeared, the world emerged. What I think is so beautiful here is, I think that what the Baal Shem Tov is saying is that Sarah's laughter, right, by connection, right, if the Baal Shem Tov's not talking about Sarah directly, Sarah's laughter is this laughter of creation, right? She's making space in her womb, in her bikirba, in herself, to create something new, right? contracting something inside of herself to create room for this new life. And that what she's doing is not just good because it creates room for Yitzchak to come into the world, but that it's divine. It's emulating God in some way, to make herself able to have that space. And I think that is a really beautiful thought about what it means maybe to have a child in an older age, right? When you've already sort of set yourself into your ways and you have to change a little bit in order to make room for that new life or that new baby. And also to think of laughter as a way of creating space, new things, as making yourself more accessible, right? I think that does feel true to me, that when someone laughs, everyone sort of relaxes, right? Like if you're in a meeting and you make a joke and the board, the president of the board laughs, you're like, oh, okay, he's on my page, right? He's accessible. So that I think is one of the positive spins, right? What can we learn from Sarah? We can learn that through our own joy and our own laughter, we can create space. We can be aware of space that needs to be created, and we can use our laughter like Latova in a positive way in that way. But I think there are two other beautiful ways we can think about Sarah's laughter. So shortly after this pasuk, right, 2 chapters later, we see in Breishit Aleph Vav 21:6, V'tomer Sarah tzchok asali Elokim kol hashamea yitzchak li. Right, and so Sarah says, God has brought me laughter. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And I think here too, we could interpret this as like, well, laugh at me, right? Oh, look at that old lady who had a baby. But choosing to look at it as to laugh with me, Rashi brings a very old midrash from Breishit Rabbah, Yismach alai. Right, so the midrash says, Harbe akarot mifkedu ima, harbe cholim nitrafu bo bayom, harbe tfilot na'anu ima, v'rov schok haya ba'olam. The Breishit Rabbah teaches that many barren women were remembered together with her. So when Sarah had her baby, many others did too. Many sick were healed in that day. Many prayers were answered with hers. And so when people were happy, they were not just rejoicing because Abraham had his covenantal son, but they were rejoicing because so many things went well. And we know, right, that there's a healing power to laughter. Like even in science today, again, we have Dr. Rosen on the phone. Always makes me nervous when I spout science, but hopefully she'll confirm that when you laugh, like your hormones change, and laughter can cause healing. It can alleviate tension in your body. It can reduce anxiety, and there are these things called laughing circles. If you Google one, oh, Monica is going to tell us something. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm eating. That's why my video's off. That is correct. Laughing certainly can cause changes, and it's been, it has been evidence, scientifically studied that it can cause a shift in certain things in your body.
Yeah. So there are these laughing circles that I was reading about, like people who are going through very difficult medical times, they come together and they just like laugh together. And it probably is very forced at the beginning, right? But like sitting in a circle full of people laughing, I imagine you start laughing for real at some point. And there have been these studies that show that they either heal faster or their outlook is just better. But there's a real positive power. And so to think that Sarah chooses to laugh, right? Maybe at that point in her life, hearing she's going to have a son is happy, but also anxiety provoking, right? Like, who's going to be there for Yitzchak when she dies? Because presuming she dies, right, like at a certain normal age, or what if she's doesn't like really feel physically well enough to like run after a toddler anymore, right? And instead of choosing to worry, Sarah chooses to laugh, and she chooses to have this healing power come into her. And that spreads throughout the world, right? That when people laugh with her, all of those wonderful things happen for them as well. So far, I think, right, we can think of laughter as a creating power and also as a healing power. And for Sarah to use her laughter in those ways, I think is really, I don't want to say intuitive, but maybe like advanced, emotionally advanced, right? Like high emotional capacity to be able to use laughter in such a beautiful way. And then there's one
Do
other. Go ahead, Charles.
you really think that she's saying Chok Asali Elohim, that she means that in a positive way?
So I think it's a fair question, right? Definitely the shot, the literal meaning, I think could be that God is sort of like having a laugh at my expense, as is everyone else who hears this news. And that is how I learned it as a child, certainly. But this is the translation from Sepharia, so the standard translation that people use today from JPS. And it is translated as God has brought me laughter. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. Like I didn't edit that to my own purpose. So I think that, certainly Rashi seems to feel that Yitzchak li means Yismach alai, will rejoice on my account. And so I think that it's possible that even, right, and here's sort of like the tricky turning point in laughter, is that even in a moment where people are laughing with you, sometimes you feel like people are laughing at you, right? Like my kids say it all the time. And I say, no, she's not. She's truly happy for you. She's laughing with you, right? But it can be a little bit tricky. I agree. I think that the fact that the Midrash Rabbah reads it as a sort of healing and also, I don't know the right words, but like a healing and happiness in laughter, that's like a strong point in reading it in that, a strong point in our favor in reading it that way. So yeah.
I feel like it also sort of connects with the similar ambiguity of the first reading as well, where it's like both Sarah is laughing at God perhaps a little bit, but also she's sort of perhaps laughing with joy or with surprise. And perhaps here, maybe God is having a joke on her and other people will laugh at her, but they're probably also, also the interpretation which people are laughing with her and, bringing her joy. So.
Yeah. I think that, right, this is normal, right? Often we have mixed emotions at big news, and that maybe the laughter in some way is indicating that piece. That seems reasonable. I like that. There's sort of a duality to the laughter in both places, right? It also might have started as like there's no way. And then as she started laughing, she thought like, actually, I'm joyful that I have this space to create inside of me, right? And people might have said, oh, Sarah, like, I can't believe she's having a baby at 90 or whatever it is. And then they thought like, oh, maybe that will mean I'll have a baby at 90. And they started to laugh too, right? And that laughter caused this like snowball effect of healing and empowerment and positive thinking and all of those things. The last way I want to look at laughter is like a bit of a circuitous route. And I learned it through Aviva Zorenberg. So I'm going to walk us through her thinking and then we'll read her conclusion. So the last place that we are going to think about laughter is another parak later, right? We're flying through this parsha. Here we see V'yigdal hayeled. This is Yitzchak. But Yitzchak has grown up, v'yigamal, and he's weaned. V'yas Avraham mishte gadol v'yom higamel et Yitzchak. And Avraham held this great feast on the day that Yitzchak was weaned, presumably as like a celebration of his child's growth. And interestingly, Rashi says, Shahayu sham gedolei hadur, Shem v'ever v'avimelech. And Rashi says that, what does it mean that it was a great feast? Like, was there a lot of food? Was it very lavish? No, it means that there were the great men of that generation present. And again, he's quoting from a very old Midrash in Breishit Rabbah. And the people there are Shem, Ever, and Avimelech. And what's interesting about this is that Avimelech is the king that took Sarah, right? In last week's Parsha, Avram and Sarah go down to Egypt, and Avram is very worried. It turns out in a good way, or justifiably so, perhaps, that the king will take Sarah because she's very beautiful. And so he asks her to pretend to be her sister, but we'll leave that aside for now, maybe a characteristic we don't want to emulate of Abraham's. And Avimelech does take her. And there are actually some within the canon, a totally reasonable tradition that say that Avimelech is the father of Yitzchak, actually. Right? Think about it. Avimelech takes Sarah, presumably for one, more physical reason. He doesn't know her good qualities yet. And they spend the night together. And then the next morning, Hashem sort of intervenes, and Abraham and Elimelech have it out, and they part on good terms, and Sarah goes home with Abraham. But here, Abraham is so old, right? And Abimelech was presumably a little bit younger. And so here, Sarah maybe had sex with someone who was younger and more virile, I don't know how you pronounce that word, right? Then her own husband Abraham, and then she has a baby. It's like kind of surprising, right? It's a crazy midrash. But then to think about having a feast where Abraham invites Abimelech to that feast, possibly the father of his own child, right, is kind of wacky. And so Aviva Zornberg, who wrote a beautiful book on Breishit called The Beginning of Desire, she suggests, and I am aware as we start this, that we actually just said the opposite a few minutes ago when we were processing, that laughter is sometimes a confusing language, but let's try to engage in it as a mode of communion, as Aviva Zornberg calls it. So she says, like the su'udah, the food of the feast, laughter is a mode of communion. Michael Tournier writes of the phenomena of cryptophagia, the private language of twins, which thrives at the expense of normal speech and of social intelligence. In the twinless world, the phenomenon is paralleled by that of laughter. Oops, that's a typo, spelling mistake, because when two individuals laugh together, and only then, they come nearer to the mystery of cryptophagia. Right, and I do think that we see that sometimes, right? If you visit a country where you don't speak the language, but you start engaging with someone and you start laughing, usually they start laughing too, right? And again, the tensions sort of ease, what we talked about at the beginning. At such times when they are using a pseudo language, laughter, based on a common ground, which unintelligible in itself, has as its function to narrow the distance between their respective positions, which divides them from that common base. The mouth filled with real laughter, like the food of the feast, audible and sensible to others, is an image representing the end of days, the overcoming of separateness and closure. In this world, it remains a mere possibility that constantly destroys itself. The birth of Isaac initiates the period of feasting and laughter, of the bearable lightness of being. I think that what she's saying here, right, is that by extending the invitation to Avimelech, Abraham is saying, look, we have lots of differences, but let's come together and eat and laugh together. And that Yitzchak, right, which comes from the verb of laughter, is the initiator of this period where they can come together. And so laughter can be creating, it can be healing, and it can also be a bridge between people who have different opinions, different ideas. And there, maybe we do see the echo, right, of God clearly thinks Sarah can have a child. Sarah thinks, no way, I can't do that. And then in her laughter, she comes to accept that reality, right? People look at Sarah and say, there's no way she could have a child. But then they laugh and they realize maybe there's a way I could have a child, right? And barren women became pregnant or had babies on that day. But when reading this, I couldn't help but think about the song from Mary Poppins. I don't know if we have any movie aficionados here, right? But in Mary Poppins, there's this funny scene where they go and they visit, oh gosh, his name is escaping me at the moment, right? But they're Mary Poppins and her entourage go to visit this banker, and they're laughing up on the ceiling. And they sing this song, which I'm not going to sing, but I am going to play if we, maybe if I can. Queued up and ready to go. Let's see if it works.
I love to laugh.
Okay, so here are the lyrics. Feel free to laugh.
Loud and long and clear.
Love to laugh.
It's getting worse every year. The more I laugh, the more I fill with glee.
You're no help at all.
The more I'm a merrier me.
Right. So I think, besides having loved that movie as a child, that idea, this bearable lightness of being that Aviva Zornberg is talking about in a very serious way, I think, right, like you see it sort of play out in the movie, that when you laugh, you become physically lighter, you float up to the ceiling, right? And certainly sort of going along with that physical healing, that there is certainly a psychological benefit to laughing. And when you can laugh to either make light of something or to truly enjoy it, you can you float. And I think that there's something particularly interesting about how the more he laughs, the more he fills with glee, and the more the glee, the more I'm a merrier me, which presumably means he laughs more, right? There's almost like a not vicious but beautiful cycle to laughter, where the more you laugh, the happier you are, the more you'll laugh again. And lest you think this is only in Mary Poppins, there are two beautiful Gemaras from Sachlim that I wanted to end with here. That do, I think, show that there is a strong tradition of valuing laughter. And it's not explicitly tied to Sarah Imenu. I think maybe because of gender, maybe because it's like a tenuous tie. But I want to argue that it really does come on some unconscious level, right? That the first time we hear laughter in Tanakh is Sarah laughing in this creative, joyful, right, healing, communicative way, and that sets the stage for laughter being something that's valued within our tradition, thousands of years later. So here in Psachlim, Kihada Rava Makame de Patach Lahu L'Rabanan, right? This is a classroom. And Rabbah was getting up to teach the halacha to the Rabbanan, to the sages. Amar milta de bidichuta. And he would say some humorous comment. It's like, right, like I think they teach at YU when you teach homiletics, how to give a Dvar Torah, they say, start with a hook, right? And like a joke is a good hook. So lots of rabbis, right, start their Dvar Torah with a joke. And they're following Rabbah's practice, that he would start with something humorous. V'badchu Rabbanan. And the rabbis would be cheered, right? It was like, it wasn't just to like get their interest. It was like it got them into a good place. Ulebasof yativ ba'imsa v'patach b'shma'ata. And then they would sit in trepidation and begin teaching. So it's not like it made the class frivolous. It was like it put them in this place where they were open to learning, where they had that space inside of them for creation. And that was his practice. So I think that's beautiful, right? To start with a joke. Often, like you start a board meeting with a Dvar Torah, maybe we should start more board meetings with jokes. Jokes and then Divrei Torah. And then a similar idea from the Gemara here, a totally different Masachet from Ta'anit, Kafbet Amud Aleph, 22a. There's this long story, and we're coming to it in the middle, where Eliyahu Hanavi, right? Eliyahu, the prophet who maybe never died, right? Often plays a role like where he's a bridge between this world and the world to come. He's talking to Rabbi Baroka, this other rabbi, and they're standing in the marketplace, almost like like they're like standing above it, they're watching it, they're somehow sort of not in this world. Adahachi v'hachi, atu hanach tre ate, right? That in the meantime, while Eliyahu and Rabbi Baroka are having this conversation, these two brothers come into the marketplace that they're watching. Amar le, and Eliyahu says to Rabbi Baroka, Nami b'ni alma afi nimhu azal legabayhu. Right, these two also have a share in the world to come. Like Eliyahu is pointing out people who merit a share in the world to come, in paradise. And so he says these two brothers have that share. And Rabbi Baroka is curious, like he doesn't understand it's not evident. They're not great Torah scholars. They're not giving tzedakah. And so Amar Lahu, he goes over to the two brothers and he says, Ma'u daichu, like what's your job, right? Like what is getting you to this place where Eliyahu says that? Amru le inche baduche. Oh, we're jesters. We're court jesters. Anan mavdachinan atzive. We cheer up people who are sad, who are depressed. Right? That's their job. They're clowns, they're comedians. And we're not going to read the Inami at the moment because it's not really relevant, but I do want to be transparent and honest that maybe that's not the only way to read it. But their job is to cheer up people who are depressed. So here we see that Eliyahu is placing this enormous value on laughter and on comedy and on its ability to really transform someone from being sad to being happy. And if we read it the Inami way, if we read it alternatively, Ki chazinan be'trei di'it lahu tigra behadaihu, tarchinan ve'avdan lahu simla, that when we see two people who are fighting, who have a quarrel between them, we strive to make peace between them. And I think that here, maybe you're seeing sort of the echo of Aviva Zorenberg's read, right? That laughter can be a way of cheering people up. So you could read it that they're just peacekeepers, but you also could definitely read it that they're using their jester abilities, their comedian abilities to create peace between other people. So to conclude, I want to look at this quote from Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik, who is talking about the Yamim Noraim, about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but talks about how Jewish laughter is really bound up in Jewish faith. And again, I think, I'm not sure Rabbi Soloveitchik would say he learned this from Sarah Imenu, but I think that it's totally fair to say that it really sets the stage for that type of valuing. Because again, this is the first serious place. I think Abraham laughs one time before Sarah in last week's Parsha, but Sarah's laughter is really the foundation, I would say, for laughter within Tanakh. And so he says, Jewish laughter is bound up with Jewish faith. And Abraham's child is named for laughter because his birth inverted expectations, vindicated Abraham and Sarah, I would say, his faith, and laid the foundations of a people who would confound those expectations again and again, thereby vindicating this faith throughout the generations. Which is why for centuries on the first days of Awe, right, on Rosh Hashanah, Abraham's children have gathered in synagogues all around the world, remembered the birth of Isaac, and beseeched Almighty God to grant them a year of life, love, and laughter. Right, so Rabbi Soloveitchik is talking about why we specifically read the Parsha of Yitzchak's birth and the Akedah during Rosh Hashanah, and his answer is that it actually has to do with the value of laughter within our faith, and that part of it is about confounding expectations, right? Something about laughing maybe at ourselves, right? Gently at ourselves. Wow, we were the underdogs and we made it yet again. And that somehow faith gets bound up with laughter. So in thinking about Sarah and about her characteristics, of which we unfortunately don't know so much about her, I would argue that just like we try to emulate Abraham's wonder or sense of justice, that we should try to emulate Sarah's ability to laugh in all of the many ways we could think about it, whether it is for creation, for healing, for crossing boundaries together, and that really has set a place where we highly value laughter within our tradition, and that we should continue to use laughter as a tool in that way. I welcome thoughts, ideas, pushback. I'm going to stop the share. Okay. Oh, someone? Rebecca. Oh. You have a thought? You're muted if you're talking. Oh, okay. Wonderful. Well, next week we have Monday night, there's Torah on Tap. We're going to think about tzedakah in a sort of traditional and also maybe non-traditional ways. And then next Wednesday, we'll move on to Rivka, and we'll end with Yitzchak the following Wednesday. So have a wonderful week and a good Shabbat, and I'll see you soon.
Yeah.